Mackenzie Johnston with Tri-State Livestock News, bringing you discussions concerning fair cattle markets. Today we have the pleasure to chat with Corbitt Wall of Canyon, Texas. He is with DV Auction and produces your daily feeder flash. First off, heading into this fall run of calves, what's your prediction for the feeder calf market going forward?
Well, if you've listened to my reports, I'm not very optimistic in October for these calves. There's just too many of them. And I talk about it all the time. I think people understand it, but they continue to have their calves at the same time of the year all the time. And, you know, that's the way Dad did it, and that's the way Granddad did it. And all the kids come home to brand on the same day. And you know, they do everything exactly the same as they always did. If everybody on your road is turning their bulls out at the same time, branding the same time, doing everything at the same time, how smart is that? So we've got way too many calves in October. Everybody wants to move their cows and whatnot, and preg check and do this and that, and they all want to bring their calves to town in October. And a lot of them are weaned and have shots, but there's so many of them that aren't, and then just the sheer supply, the numbers of them, it hurts the market. We just got done placing all these yearlings that we had coming off summer pasture. The feedlots are full. We got no place to go with them. It's dry. It's drier. We were just talking about that before we started this, how dry it is everywhere. It doesn't appear that there's going to be much wheat pasture grazing, at least in the Texas Panhandle, Oklahoma Panhandle, eastern Colorado, southwest Kansas. There's not going to be any wheat pasture grazing. So the demand for calves is light right now. The demand for feeder cattle is good still. But it's going to be tough sledding on these calves, and then it's so dry and dusty, and it just makes it that much worse. We've already seen some of the widest temperature swings that we've ever seen for the fall of the year, and it's tough. You know, the same reason that guys don't want to do the work to wean their calves and hold them is the same reason that the guys that are buying them don't want them either, because they get sick and they die, and it's not much fun. And it's hot during the day, and then it's cool in the mornings. And you know, if a guy can hold his calves until we get some hard freezes all around, it'll be that much easier. Let these farmers get done with harvest. They'll come back into the market. That's the only money they've made on their grain for several years now. I just think the markets will be so much better if you have the ability to hold your calves for a while.
What's your outlook for the fat cattle market going forward through the rest of the year?
Well, we're kind of up in the air right now. Our last cattle on feed report says we have, you know, 200,000 or 300,000 more head of cattle that have been on feed for 150 days or more, which is hard to swallow, as big as our carcass weights already are now. And so we've got all these big cattle. And I don't see how that really works. Whenever you look back 150 days ago, we were in the absolute worst of the COVID. Everybody was scared to sell their calves or their feeders, feeder cattle in general. The runs were extremely light in the sale barns. There wasn't much going on in the country. And our placements were, you know, where we're used to seeing placement numbers on your cattle on feed report that are 95 to 105. Our placement numbers were like 80 and 77 and things like that, which was just unbelievably low. That matches up to right now as we go through the deep part of October, November. And I think we're going to see some lighter numbers of market-ready cattle. I really do. And I know that doesn't really jibe with what we're seeing on some of these numbers of cattle on feed over 150 days, but you know, we put a lot of peewees on feed too, and that figures in. But I think we're going to see an opportunity to gain some ground in our markets. Of late, we haven't had, you know, the sky hasn't fallen here for a few months, and guys are starting to get a little bit of grit back to them. They're not selling on a Monday and a Tuesday anymore like they have. And we've gained, you know, I hate to date this recording, but in the last 2 weeks, we've gained $5 in the cash market. I think we can gain some more ground. And more importantly, I think as we work through the deep part of the fall, I think some of your sellers can move some of these heavier cattle and get our carcass weights down a little bit and hopefully get us back in some decent shape before the end of the year.
You mentioned carcass weights. How soon do you think we'll get those under control, and how do you see those affecting the market in the near future? Because they are a bit outrageous.
Your packers want cattle to grade well. You know, when we came out of the worst of the COVID, when we didn't sell any cattle because the packing plants weren't operating at full steam there for a while, when we came out of that, we had the best grading that we had ever had for that time of the year. We were normally slaughtering calves that had been fed, and they don't grade that well because they don't have enough maturity. But we were having all-time record high grading for that time of the year, you know, up in the 80s for the whole 5-area feeding region, you know, the whole nation for that matter. And your packers kind of liked that because it was easier to sell that meat. And of course, everybody wants choice and better, but you know, years ago, when I first started grading cattle with USDA, and I was a livestock grader for 20 years there, prime was a fluke of nature. You know, once in a while you'd find one, and most people don't know that Jerseys have more primes than any other breed because they're so light muscled. But you know, it was just kind of a fluke of nature. And whenever we were at live grading cattle, we never actually called anything a prime hardly because it was just so odd. Well, now you hear about guys sending in loads of cattle that are a third prime. I think a lot of that has to do with the instrument grading because it doesn't have a conscience and it doesn't kind of stick to the norms. But the packers like the grading, and I think our consumers they know what choice is and they want it too. So I don't know that we're gonna back off of those big carcasses. You never hear anybody talk about fit in the box anymore like you used to when they would talk about, you know, having to keep the carcass weights in check. Nobody seems to worry about that. I always thought that's what knives were for. You know, if they didn't fit the box, you just cut part of it off and then it fell in perfect. But I don't know that our carcass weights are ever going to get back down where they had been, you know, for the several years there. I think we're used to feeding cattle a little bit longer. Nobody talks about feeding cattle 120 days in the Southern Plains even anymore. And we used to say, well, you put cattle on feed weighing 8.5, you feed them for 120 days. Well, we want to make them bigger than that, and we want them to grade better. They're going to have bigger carcasses. So I think we could get them back down a little bit. And I think the last report said we were 29 pounds heavier than a year ago. I think we could get it down some this fall, but I don't know that we're going to get it back down into what we call the normal range for a while because we're out of step with that right now.
Last time we talked, we discussed the need to increase negotiated cash trade within our live cattle markets. Do you think we've gained any ground on that front?
I would say in the last 6 or 8 months, we have sold more cattle negotiated cash than we have in any probably 6 or 8 month period for the past several years. I think a lot of it was because of people were aware of what was going on. I think the initial investigation that they put on the packers, I don't think it scared them any, but I think it made them a little more conscious of doing that. And then they even put out what I like to call charity bids, you know, during the worst of their gouging. You know, they would come out and bid a couple bucks higher on a Monday or Tuesday coming out, you know, in the late spring there. Guys weren't even asking for that yet, and they were just giving it to them, you know. I think because they had just a smidge of conscience, and they were kind of feeling a little bit guilty, if you can measure that, that they were making $2,500 a head, and guys were losing a couple $100 a head on the cattle. So, you know, they'd actually come out and give a couple bucks more, and then everybody dove at it, and they were selling several cattle. We're selling several cattle right now, negotiated cash. It's just the awareness of it is really big out there. We've got that bill before the House and 2 bills before the Senate right now talking about that. And I think there's a lot of awareness about negotiated cash. I think maybe some of the smaller outfits that were dipping their toe into formula deals are kind of aware that the formula deals they're getting aren't nearly as good as the corporate's formula deals. And I think they're wanting to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem, and they're returning to cash.
There's been a lot of talk around negotiated grid. Do you think that's going to help competition within our cattle markets?
I've always said negotiated grid is the second best way to sell fat cattle, next to negotiated cash. The key is negotiation. So, I always say in negotiation, that means both parties have some say in what the end price is going to be. So I love the negotiation. The problem about the grid is we can't walk up in there and peek through the window and see what's happening at the hot scale or at the grading line. So that's all undercover. I talk about old stuff all the time. My dad always said that, hanging cattle on the rail, that's basically what you're doing with the grid, but you're negotiating your base price on your grid. But, my dad always said, the difference between hanging your cattle on the rail or selling them grid or having them stolen is if you hang them on the rail, you have to pay the freight. If you have them stolen, they take care of the freight for you. But and I still feel that way.
Yeah.
But who's going to sell stuff to somebody and then you dump them off and then they shut the door and you don't get to see what goes on behind the scenes? I don't like that. I think the big reason that we're seeing this bid to grid that they're talking about is, and I don't think there's that many people that really think that it's going to work. There's just a few voices that are really loud, and a lot of people listen to them, that are pushing this bid the grid, and they're doing it for their own benefit. They're wanting to profit off that. They're wanting to use their forum to establish that grid base price, and they don't really want that negotiated grid bidding to happen out in the country. They want to control that and profit from it. And they're wanting to get rid of negotiated cash because people are used to that and they know how to do it. So, I don't think it's the savior. I don't think we should get rid of it. There's pockets in the country where negotiated grid is pretty popular. I spent a lot of time in Missouri. North of the river, there's still people that feed cattle there, and they typically sell negotiated grid, and they get along pretty good with it. There's some places, eastern Iowa, places like that do it. But, for the most part, it's not ever going to be a big deal in Texas and Kansas and eastern Nebraska and northeastern Colorado or places like that. It's not the answer, and I think people are just pushing it for their own benefit.
Speaking of negotiated trade, what are your thoughts on Senator Fisher's new bill, the Cattle Market Transparency Act of 2020?
I think it's fantastic. I think it is. I've heard her speak several times. She's somebody that at least understands what we're talking about. She's been around it. She knows the difference between a steer and a heifer. Those are important things when we start talking about this kind of stuff. I think it gives us an option from 5014. You know very well that whenever I first started pushing minimum negotiated cash mandate, that I was on 3014 because I knew that 50, and everybody in the North was all about 50. Well, and that's great if you can get it, but I think we bit off more than we could chew,
right?
Because you got so much opposition from the Southern Plains. Even the feedlots didn't want to do it, let alone TCFA and KLA. Mm-hmm. The individuals didn't want to do it because they knew that it would not work. We've got packing plants in the Texas Panhandle that haven't bought any cash cattle for years. They don't have a cash cattle buyer. All they do is they schedule cattle in and they slaughter them.
That's wild.
How do you go from 0 to 50, in 2 seconds? You can't.
Yeah.
So, in the Texas Panhandle region as a whole is only about 6 or 7% negotiated cash. 50 is too much. We can't get them there. It'd be great if you could, but you just can't do it. And the opposition is too powerful. So this bill that Senator Fisher's got up says that we are going to set regional minimum requirements, which I think is great. The problem that I see with it is it's going to bring about a bunch of drama as we start, you know, she wanted to put a comment period up and everything. You know, we saw whenever they went to Denver and had the big fight about it, you know, and then ended up, you know, NCBA was stronger than some of your state affiliates, and they, you know, they overpowered them and we weren't able to get anything done. Well, so we're going to have that regionally now. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I don't know how we'll ever get through it. And I don't know who we can find that's got enough power to stop the buck and say, you know, this is all we're going to do. We're going to do it right here. So I'm a little bit worried about that, but I think the idea is awesome. I think it like I said, it gives us an option from 5014. You know, I think Chuck Grassley is John Wayne. You know, I'm all about him pushing that. He's been about it for a lot longer than most people have even been talking about it. And I love it. But, you know, he was kind of strapped there being from Iowa. Iowa cattlemen's, Nebraska cattlemen, some of them up there, you know, they already have, well, Iowa's already got 50%. And Nebraska's, you know, up in the 30s. So, you know, they were trying to push it a little bit more. Which with this regional deal, maybe they can get their set even higher. Maybe they could get it up to 65 or 70, and that would be great. But it gives a lot of levity there, and hopefully it can satisfy some more people, because there's actually people that weren't happy with just 50%. So I'm thinking that it does good. I love the other things in there, trying to loosen up the confidentiality a little bit. The idea of having the packers publish what they have for delivery every day for the next 14 days. You know, if your cattle sellers know how to use that information, that's very good information. And I mentioned that you know, they already do that in hogs. Of course, they don't have any cash trade at all in hogs. So the packers will pretty much give you anything you want. Now with the hogs, they've already lost everything, and we can't even get people excited about hanging on to the end of the tip of the tail of the cash dog here. But we've got to do that, and then, you know, she's got it listed in there where she would like to basically set up a library of some of these formula contracts where people could look through them and see. I tell you what, you know, I've said it many times, and I've talked to some of these guys that manage these big corporate feedlots, and they don't see how these smaller independent feeders are doing it. They said, we could not make money on the cash market. We've got to have our contract. And they, you know, we say it's no negotiation, but they negotiate it maybe once a year or every 3 years for the particular kind of cattle that they raise. And it can have anything in there, you know, up to and including, you know, Big 12 football scores. And I think there's a lot of stuff in there. You know, guys are getting pretty sizable premiums for yield grade, which, you know, that sometimes you see that on negotiated grid, but not very often. They're getting big premiums for yield grade, for dressing percentage, for hitting targets on carcass weights. They're getting premiums for bringing their cattle on a Tuesday. You know, it starts to add up after a while. And I tell you what, that for the guys that are against mandated negotiated cash trade or against rocking the boat at all, these bigger corporate feeders that have these sweetheart deals with these packers, this is what scares them the most, is letting these contracts get out. And if we had a library of them, or a farmer feeder could look through there and see what's going on, they'll squeal about that. I don't think that'll ever happen either, because they'll pull in everybody they can find. I tell you what, it scares them to death. You start talking about having to pull the covers back from some of these contracts, these formula contracts, and I mean, everybody squeals. I don't know how much the success is. I've talked to some of the guys on the inside, and they say Deb Fisher's bill is getting a lot of support. A lot of support, and more so even than the 5014, and it's only been out there a week or two. So
why is that? Why is that gaining some more traction than the 5014?
I think some of the levity in it, being able to change regionally, I think that's important. I think even people that don't know anything about cattle trade, we've talked about it enough now that they're starting to, whenever, some of those legislators, even they went into the grocery store and saw that they had hamburger meat for $10 a pound.
Mm-hmm.
And so then when they hear this talk about cattle trade and being more fair and everything, it's starting to click with them. And so they're starting to pay more attention to it. And, there's been a big push. There was a deal come out today with American Farm Bureau. We pushed and pushed and pushed, tried to get them to support minimum cash trade, and they formed committees and talked about it and did this and that, and then finally decided to back up and punt because they don't want to lose their support from NCBA, because NCBA is so powerful. But I tell you what, there's some chinks in their armor all of a sudden, and I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't start falling off more and more as we go forward with some of these bills.
The cattle industry is still waiting on some kind of news from the DOJ investigation into our big four beef packers. Do you think we're going to be hearing anything anytime soon?
Not of substance, I don't. I don't think people paid enough attention to the initial report that they put out. Mm-hmm. We just talked about Deb Fisher's bill. It's exactly what the initial report was, the investigative report was. It was. The investigative report was a blueprint on how the industry can help itself. It basically told us what to do, and that was a report stamped USDA at the top and signed off. And NCBA thumbed their nose at it, and they said, "No, we know better than you do." Well, Deb Fisher's bill basically looked at the blueprint in that investigative report and then used it as a blueprint for her bill, and said, let's make some changes here to save this industry. And so I don't think people took enough stock in that report. It's very, very hard to come out and say, the Packers, they're guilty of this, and this is what we're going to do to them. And I don't see them hanging them up by their toenails or anything like that. Who's going to do it? You go all the way to the top. You got to go to Fifth Avenue and flag down a Lamborghini or something to get a hold of somebody that actually has the final say. They just pass the buck. I don't know who you hold responsible. So basically, the only way they can do anything is fine them. Well, hell, we saw that they were making some of them $2 or $3 million a day per facility during the worst of the COVID. Well, how much could you fine them that it would make a difference? It would be so astronomical that they would probably put limits on it, and then it wouldn't even bother them. I mean, we've seen all-time record profits from them. So I think what USDA decided to do was say, hey, idiots, here's what you need to do to fix your industry so that it's viable. We'll help you do it, but you got to help yourselves first. Mm-hmm. And then we saw, our biggest trade association decide that they didn't want to take the direction that USDA gave them, and they fought it instead. And until we get enough individuals to push back against that, using their dollars against them, we're never going to see anything happen. So I don't really see anything more coming from that investigation. I think they might put out another report and just kind of a follow-up to the initial report. But, what are we going to do? Are they going to start pulling people out of these plants with handcuffs on? I don't think so, So I don't expect much from it.
Since we last spoke, the USDA has proposed implementing RFID tags for traceability across the industry by 2023. What are your thoughts on this?
I'm totally against RFID tags. Unless you're in some kind of a branded program where you got third-party verification and you're reaching out for a premium or something like that, and you can achieve that, and that's your choice to do it, I'm against it. I'm against mandatory ID tags. The metal tags that we've been using forever have worked plenty fine. Mm-hmm. Everybody's good with them. And these tags what they will do is they will force a lot of people from the industry. And that is the worst thing you can do. We're losing them like crazy now. You know, the average age of our cow-calf man's well into his 70s. And you want to kill an old cattleman off, take his cows away from him. And he don't last long after that. You got to have a reason to get up in the morning. And that's what those men have done their whole lives. And it keeps them going. And every time we force something else down their throat, there's just a few more of them get out. Well, you know, my old chute, I can't hardly put them all through there, you know. And I'm not going to be around long enough to justify buying a new one. I think I'll just sell out. And that's what's going to happen. And that's kind of what your big corporates want. The fewer people that it takes for them to manipulate, the easier it is for them. And we'll have the same number of cattle in fewer people's hands, you know. And then when you start losing your independent producers, your smaller cow-calf men, well, that's harder, you know. So you got fewer customers at the feed store. You know, you got fewer people living on those smaller places. You got fewer kids going to school in those rural schools. You know, it kills everything. And I think that's the core of America right there, is our rural communities. And it goes right along in forcing smaller producers out. We can take care of stuff here. We don't need all of our cattle in a confinement operation like the hogs to keep track of them. We've done a pretty good job. And the greatest thing about the cattle industry is you can do whatever you want to do. You know, if you like red cows or black cows or white cows or whatever, by God, you can do it. And that's what makes it fun. That's why everybody loves it. And you start pushing people around, it just forces more of them out of the business. And I absolutely hate that.
What are your thoughts on the second round of CFAP payments that are going to be coming out?
You know, I think initially when we heard the announcement, I think it helped the market a little bit. You know, your cattle people, especially your backgrounders, you know, they're guilty. You know, the government comes along and says, you know, you guys have had a hard time. You're probably going to have a hard time paying your loans back and stuff like that. They give you some money, and what do? They go buy more cattle with them. But so I think it helped the market a little bit. You know, I know for a fact lots of people said, well, I could have made a tractor payment with that, but I decided to buy more cattle. And I think it helped the market a little bit. I think we didn't notice it right away, but it helped. The first round helped the market, and I said the second round helped the market a little bit too. I like the fact that they capped it at $250,000 per entity, because you know I act like I'm against the corporate feeder. I'm not, but I'm more for the smaller independent guys. You know, for the little guys, and you know, if a little guy's getting a check for $55 a head, you know, on his calves, just imagine what those big outfits are getting.
Yeah.
And it's kind of nice to see them limit that, but still help the little guy. But I tell you what, I've gotten some opposition from that, is I hate to see the cattle industry get used to these cheese checks, I call them. You know, everybody knows the poor people can go and get free cheese. Well, the government's been on the farmers have been on cheese checks to the point now where when they sit down and make their farm plan out, the cheese checks are part of it. Once you've got to the point where your government assistance is part of your balance sheet, well, you've lost. And so these cattle people can't get used to that. You know, that's why whenever you go to Yellowstone Park, it says, don't feed the bears. It's not because they're afraid that the bear will eat your hand off, which he might do, but nobody really cares whether they eat your hand off or not. The problem is once you start feeding the bears forget how to hunt. And I don't think we should feed the bears on this cattle industry deal. I'm glad that people got it, and I'm glad that it helped a lot of people, but don't get used to it.
Right. Do you think these payments are going to continue in the coming years for the cattle industry?
I hope not.
Yeah.
Because then people will refuse to change. You know, that's what's happened to our farming. You know, a guy farms 3,000 acres of corn every year. He hasn't made any money in 25 years, or there was a couple of years there he made some money, and he just keeps planting more corn. You know, quit beating your head up against the wall. Well, I get my payment. You know, I know for a fact. You know, that's why they're planting cotton down in this country, down in the Southern Plains so much. Cotton is the last crop you can really screw the government good on, and so people are raising cotton where they shouldn't even be raising cotton, and you know, I know people that plant wheat knowing damn well it ain't going to come up. You know, they only plant it in the first few rows around the edge because that's as far as the inspector is going to go. He's not going to walk all the way out to the center of the field, and they know it's not going to come up. Why spend all that money on seed? They've just abused the system so bad. But you know, if we did away with all, you know, just like on the government subsidized insurance programs, people abuse that. They just abuse it and abuse it. If we didn't have any of that government involvement in that, people would make different decisions on what they plant and things like that, and to make themselves profitable. They would be forced to do it. And if these cattle people get used to these cheese checks all the time, they're not going to change what they're doing. They'll afraid they'll miss the date on whenever they had the maximum amount of cattle, you know, and so they won't make their decisions. But I think people need to make some decisions in cattle. You know, I say it all the time. 3/4 of our beef calves are born in the first half of the year, which means only 1/4 of them are born in the second half of the year. That's why things are screwed up. And so you got to make some decisions, you know, change the times, change the way you're producing, and do some things to help you survive. And the government checks aren't going to help that.
We continue to see African swine fever spread specifically through Germany here recently. How do you see that affecting the cattle market down the road if we don't get a handle on that?
Well, it's helping. I mean, our exports are great, and they have been great, and they could get a lot better if we weren't having these little pissing matches with all these countries. I think the sky's the limit on our exports. And, you know, we've seen China scrambling to feed their people, and they were getting significant imports from Germany on pork previous to this outbreak. Well, they've had to scramble. You know, Australia's been in a horrible drought. They're really down on production now of beef, and they are sending about all they can, or all China can afford to get. If this damn pandemic hadn't come around, this Wuhan flu, or the China flu that Trump calls it, if it hadn't come around, I think we would already be seeing significant shipments of beef to China mainland, and we are seeing some. But I think it would be very significant. I think their feelings are just hurt too much. They've got to take our grain. You know, they can't resist it. So they're taking bigger shipments of grain than they've ever taken before. I think they would be taking bigger shipments of animal protein than they ever were before too. But the feathers are just too ruffled over all this pandemic and everything. But I think every time we start sending, there's not that many places that have grain-fed beef that they can export. There's not that many places. Australia is a big one. Canada's big, of course. But you get other parts of the globe, and there's not a lot of grain-fed beef. Once people start getting used to that sweet meat, then they just want more of it, and then they'll start demanding it. And so every time we can start getting enough product in that it's not just the diplomats or whatever that get to eat it, whenever it starts getting down to where normal people start eating it, they love it and they want more of it. And so I think, you know, every time somebody has hard luck, there's somebody else that gets to benefit from it. And I hate to see that ASF break out in so many places, but I think it does give us an opportunity to expand.
With the election drawing near, you've been pretty vocal as to how the outcome is going to affect the cattle industry. How do you see it affecting the cattle industry if it goes Biden's way or if it goes Trump's way?
If Biden wins, we are screwed. And it's not Biden, guys. I mean, I guarantee you, within a few months of him winning, they'll finally admit that he ain't all there and he's not firing on all cylinders. He won't be able to keep up the schedule, so they'll have to back him off. And it's almost it ain't right for him, you know. He had a lot of a presence about himself. Of course, he didn't see eye to eye with most of our ag producers, but he was his own man. He's not his own man anymore. He's just a puppet out there. And so when you vote for Biden, you're voting for Kamala Harris. She will be there. I mean, he'll never make it through the first term. I don't think he would make it through the first 6 months. She'll be in there. Okay, we've already seen her. She's all about the Green New Deal. She wants beef to be a delicacy that you only can eat maybe when you and your wife are on your 25th anniversary somewhere and you go out. And we had some real beef tonight, and it was so special. She wants to set minimums on how much you can eat because she feels like that production of it is hurting the environment to the point that she's going to put limits on it. And I'm telling you, people, I know that you're probably sick of Trump. Trump's not that nice of a guy. And, I always say nice guys finish last. And that's why Trump, he's battling in there, How would you like to be Trump and wake up every morning and wonder what they're going to hit you with today? And, and he's hung right in there. He's 74 years old and he does 3 big rallies a day sometimes, flies all over the country. He's eating, McDonald's hamburgers on the plane in between. He's just like us, people. But a vote for Biden is really a vote for a Harris administration. And as she is against animal agriculture, she's going to put limits on it. She wants to make beef a delicacy instead of a mainstay. And I'm totally against it. I'm going to Fallon, Nevada, to a big Trump cattleman's dinner. They're having a potluck dinner and they're charging $100 a plate. People have donated cattle and we're going to auction them off and give the money to the Trump campaign. And I don't have much power, but I tell you what, I can't understand why anybody that makes their money in agriculture would even consider voting for Biden. But the hell of it is, we're only 2%. If you take all of animal or agriculture production, it's 2%. So probably less than half of that is livestock people. I mean, we don't amount to anything. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I tell people that you need to tell your wife to tell her friends at work, and you need to tell people in the coffee shop. You gotta spread it out because they don't know how bad it could be for agriculture, and they know that we've got to keep our people fed and keep our agriculture viable, or we've lost everything. But I couldn't be a bigger Trump supporter.